Well, I came to university with President Johnson having about 12 years of experience in Washington. I had trained in Youngstown, Ohio, my hometown, and was a local television reporter, became news director, and at some point along the line, about 1959, I decided to try to go to Washington, which my first intent was anyway. So I spent 7 years locally covering the police beat. I covered poverty, education, pimps and whores, and the mafia, all in that order. No, in Youngstown, Ohio.
Okay.
And I enjoyed the mafia the most, and they were interesting characters. And I decided to try to go to Washington, and I ended up working for Westinghouse Broadcasting Company. Eventually, I was assigned to cover the White House and John F. Kennedy. I covered the 1960 campaign. I met Nikita Khrushchev in 1960 as a White House correspondent, but I was assigned to Nikita Khrushchev when he came to the United States. And I traveled with him for 2 weeks across the country. And I watched him cry because they wouldn't let him go to Disneyland, because in the Soviet Union, Americans were not allowed to travel to certain places, so the State Department decided we would take some things off limits, and Khrushchev threw a tantrum. I covered foreign policy. I traveled with President Kennedy. I traveled in his campaign in 1960. I was with him the night he was elected and covered him on election night in Hannesport, Massachusetts. I covered him through the first year. And the assassination took place 1963 on November the 22nd, at which point I was selected to be one of the 3 reporters on Air Force One when President Johnson was sworn in. I was in the motorcade with President Kennedy. I had heard the 3 shots. I was on a press bus, and we asked the press bus driver to get us to wherever they took the president. We didn't know, but the press bus was 8 car lengths behind the presidential limousine. The president was here, we were here, several cars in between. The presidential limousine was driven immediately to the nearest hospital, which the Secret Service is skilled to do. We didn't know where it went because it took off at a speed of maybe 60 or 70 miles an hour. So we went to the natural place to go, and that was where Kennedy was going to make his speech. And the crowds were waiting for him. It was noon in Dallas, and they had no idea what happened downtown. They'd heard no idea of the shots. They just saw us come in like a herd of elephants looking for telephones, screaming, saying, "Where's the phones? Where's the press room?" that sort of thing. Eventually, they got the wind that something terrible had happened. And from there, I raced out of the building and raced to Parkland Hospital, where President Kennedy was being treated. As far as Lyndon Johnson goes, he was there, and eventually he became president, sworn in at Love Field. And from the first days of his administration, the war on poverty was an uppermost in his thoughts and in the legislation he would propose.